Hi everyone, welcome to the Obizz podcast series. Obizz, which is part of the COVID Kenya initiative. Our mission is to spread wisdom on health, wellness and business. Today we're talking on the business side, and I'm glad to have two very reputable guests who have made their time to come here. We have a lawyer and an accountant. We have Vruti Shah from Bowman's and Nigel Smith, who is also a partner at KPMG. And today we're talking about a topic which has become quite relevant over the last 6 months. It's likely to stay relevant for, I guess, a long period of time, which is about business restructuring. So welcome to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning. And maybe, Vruti, do you want to say some words about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Noah. So I am a partner at Bowman's. I've been practicing and involved in, creating the insolvency laws in Kenya, working with the government around that, and practicing in this space for the last 5 to 6 years. And we actually see a lot happening in the next few months and near future.
Right.
So.
Yes, great. Yeah. And Vruti, you're also very much part of the Obizz core team. We'll talk about that in a bit.
Sure.
And yourself, Nigel, are you a career accountant or?
I'm not actually an accountant. I'm a banker by trade.
Right.
But I started my career in the UK in the mid 1990s in restructuring before it became really known as a process. And since then we've sort of developed processes and policies around the world, and I joined KPMG in 2001 and helped develop their restructuring practices in London and Middle East and subsequently here. I've been here since 2015.
Okay, well, welcome. And what brought you to Kenya?
How can you not want to come to Kenya in the first place?
Fantastic, great. So let's talk about sort of a health check, because when we have an issue, then of course we go to the doctor, and you guys are sort of the doctors in the business world. So can you tell us first of all, just from a macro perspective, what your opinion is? How is Kenya performing? Of course, we've seen the Western world being hit very, very hard, and so has to some parts of Asia. It seems, relatively speaking, we've taken sort of a balanced approach here. But what are you really seeing happening with businesses here so far?
I think the first thing you have to say is the government of Kenya did a superb job in trying to prevent the spread of COVID-19.
Right.
They acted very quickly, and I think one has to give them 10 out of 10 for that. Obviously, they don't have the same resources as some of the European and American countries that can actually support businesses in the same way. So a lot of their efforts went into the prevention of spreading of the disease. I think the problems that we're having, and Vruti will obviously comment, I think the problems that we're having now is that businesses themselves are running out of cash. The businesses have had a very difficult time in obtaining supplies, certainly from China and Southeast Asia. Mm-hmm. And I think that is something which hasn't yet been overcome. Yes, the port at Mombasa was reopened, and supplies were released, but I think a lot of those supplies that were released related to a period pre-COVID. I think if you look at the shipping lanes that have been used since COVID, that they haven't hit anywhere close to capacity as if you compare it to the pre-COVID period, and I think supply is going to be a problem.
Okay, so that's on the supply side, but what about demand side? Have you seen a lot of softening, job losses, etc.?
Unfortunately, I think we're about to see that. I think that there have been obviously job losses in certain sectors, and obviously the real estate, construction, tourism has been very, very badly hit, and we all understand the reasons for that. But I think in other areas as well, there is likely to be a tightening of the economy. I think part of that is clearly people who have cash are looking to keep it, and that in itself exacerbates the problem. At KPMG, we do recommend that people obviously manage cash very carefully, and no doubt we will come on to that. Notwithstanding that, however, unless the economy can continue to ensure that the creditors are paid, then for every party you don't pay, that is another customer you don't have.
Right. So it's a vicious circle.
It's a vicious circle. So it really is a balancing item as to how to ensure that you manage your own cash whilst making sure that you don't hit the economy to a massive extent.
So Nigel, you mentioned that, of course, the government here didn't have the resources to support, like we've seen in the Western world, with the furlough schemes and
Yes.
business support, etc. But on the other hand, I guess until now, banks have been mandated to be much more supportive with the moratorium, etc. So, to what extent has that helped, and when does that run out, and what happens after?
Well, I mean, the same moratoriums have been given in other parts of the world. It isn't just East Africa. As far as East Africa is concerned, there's a couple of months left to go before, assuming it isn't extended, and that isn't known yet. I think it's been a tremendous help. Let's be very clear about that. There is, however, the other side of the coin, and that is that I think a lot of corporate directors haven't used that period sufficiently well in order to plan post-COVID. So I think, and I'm sure Vruti will either confirm or deny, but I think there's a lot of corporate directors that have said, okay, I've got a 6-month moratorium or a 9-month, whatever they've negotiated, and the world will bounce back to where it was before. I don't think enough companies have taken this opportunity of a relative downtime to reposition their businesses. And the problem with that is that if you don't know where your business is going to be when you come out of the moratorium, I do fear that your options at that point are somewhat restricted.
Right. So we'll talk a bit more about what practical sort of advice and tips people can take to plan better. But just in terms of bouncing back, we in the next few days we'll see the president potentially announce opening up the economy. What is your view on how quickly the economy could bounce back in this part of the world?
I don't think it's a matter of the economy bouncing back. I think it's the sectors within the economy that will bounce back.
Right.
I think there are some sectors that will bounce back a lot quicker than others. So I don't think it will be uniform. I think we've already discussed the leisure and tourism. But even leisure and tourism, there are sub-sectors within that. If you're at the luxury end, I personally believe there is perhaps a greater opportunity to bounce back than if you're in the mid-market. So I think with all of these things, it depends on which sector and which part of that sector are you in. I don't think it is going to be a uniform, either U-shape or V-shape bounce back.
Right,
I don't see that.
Right. So I guess we are where we are, but what sort of tips can you give to business owners and managers on how they could be planning their cash flows much better?
I think that the first thing for any corporate director to do is really firstly to look at the supply chain. How well do you know your suppliers? Not just your tier 1 or tier 2 suppliers, but how well do you know all of your suppliers? Because if you're not careful, you can have a roadblock simply because there is one item that you need that you don't get. And there are many examples of that that we've seen at KPMG, where companies that have had a very large order book can't deliver it because there is one part of the supply which isn't there. It may well be packaging, for instance. So one needs to understand that. The second thing is the directors need to try and stabilize their business. So rather than just assume that the old demand will be there and the old supply will be there, one needs to revisit and say, where do we think the demand will be? And invariably, in my view, you need to look at the number of items that you're producing, potentially reducing those to a number which are cash generative and profitable, rather than provide a whole range.
A fair bit of cost cutting, which means further job losses.
It could mean that, but it could mean a repositioning of the business, and therefore there is potential less job losses. I think in the past there have been pressures placed upon local businesses from multinationals. There's been one single source of supply. I don't think those are a great way to move forward. I think one needs to look at potentially local manufacturing, local assembly, rather than rely upon multinationals from abroad. And I think that will provide a great opportunity for Kenya going forward.
Okay, so those are good tips on the operational side. And what about with the banks? What sort of scope is there to renegotiate further moratoriums?
I think with the banks, my personal view is that they will be inundated with problem accounts, and certainly the corporates that we're advising at KPMG, we very much stress that they should revisit their business plan, as I've already said, get something which is robust and defendable. And I think if you go to a bank with a defendable business plan, you've got a chance of people listening to you. If you go with a business plan that hasn't altered and you pretend that COVID just is something of the past, I suspect that you're going to get some short change from the banks.
Right.
So in order to maximise the support from all lender groups, I would actually say revisit your business plan, get it robust, show what can be done, and then I think you will at least be given the credence that you've revisited and planned properly.
Right. I'm afraid this is a gloomy conversation, but assuming that despite doing all that, a business cannot survive, and I guess also from a bank's point of view, they would see defaults, and of course corporate directors have given personal guarantees.
Yep.
So, and I think, Vruti, it will be good to get your view from a legal point of view as well, in terms of how enforceable are personal guarantees in this part of the world.
Sure. Well, personal guarantees, my view personally is, let's not get there. Let's start from the beginning. So the first thing is, I feel like a lot of businesses just need to understand that whenever they start seeing the trouble signs in their businesses, to act. There are lots of options available so that you don't go down that way. And in terms of the sort of personal guarantee piece particularly, they are enforceable, and banks right now, whilst they're not reacting because of the directive they received from CBK and are managing this up to March 2021, at some point they're going to have to think about that asset, that distressed debt, and see whether they're going to enforce it or whether they're going to, restructure it. And going back to what Nigel was saying, if there is no business case, then the personal guarantees will come into place, any other securities that are there. And it's really the doomsday, which is, I think, what we're trying to say is the conversation needs to go to, let's turn the business around early. Right.
Okay. So you mentioned that from a legal point of view, there are other options available before you get to that sort of doomsday scenario.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess there is liquidation, administration,
so that's lots.
Bankruptcy protection. So can you just shed some light on what are these options?
No problem. I think the best one, especially in the current times that we are in, is consensual restructuring, which basically means for any business that's suffering, they really need to speak to the people that are going to help them ride this wave through. Restructure, whether it's the debt side, whether it's the credit side from their suppliers, payment terms, whatever it is, they need to start thinking about it. So if they start early, I think they have a higher success rate of getting into those agreements, make sure they work, putting everything in place. But then, of course, different businesses have different structures. So let's say there are too many creditors or suppliers that you have. And maybe sometimes consensual restructuring looks overwhelming. So maybe then you have things in the law that have been put in place since 2015 that may help you restructure. The problem that we have here in Kenya is these tools haven't been very well used. And where they have been advertised, or rather the outcome has been, the death of the company, as we call it, the undertaker's job.
Right.
So the success stories on using these tools haven't been great, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist. So if utilized in the right way, so administration could help a company recover. It gives them a breathing room from any sort of court claims or any sort of enforcement of security options and so on and so forth.
Okay.
And if I can just jump in on that, I think I completely agree with that. The one thing I would wish to stress to your listeners is that when we're talking about restructuring, we're talking about non-insolvency. So and unfortunately, a lot of people have misinterpreted that word.
Right.
So I think for the purpose of this morning, we're probably better to use the word turnaround, because when we're talking of the consensual, which Vruti has mentioned, what we're really stressing here is outside a court process. We're not talking of an insolvency process, and those that are outside that court process, one, it's confidential, which is why a lot of the success stories aren't known, because it is a confidential agreement between lender and the borrower. Whereas obviously once it goes into the court process of administration or anything or the others, at that point it's a public document. It isn't It isn't confidential. The court then take control of the company, and all sorts of changes occur at that point. I think the corporate directors are, in my view, and I'd welcome your view, my view, are very well advised to do something early and not rely upon a court process, if at all possible.
Right. Okay. So it's there are options and tools available. So that's good to know. So if somebody is facing this kind of scenario, where do they go? Do they go to their lawyer? Do they go to their accountant? Are there other specialist sort of experts they need to look at? So pragmatically, where would one go?
I think my personal view is first take stock, understand where you're at, try and understand the problems, then consult your advisors from a financial perspective, from a consulting of business perspective, understand what the roadblocks are and if there is repurposing of assets or some of the other strategies. At the same time, because a lot of these things happen simultaneously, you need to think about your debt side of the business as well. And that's where the lawyers come in to try and tell you where and how we can renegotiate some of these terms, repurpose and repackage it, so that you have breathing room to turn around the business that you want to turn around.
Okay.
I think the other thing on that is not all lawyers and not all accountants can actually provide this service. In that they may well be able to buy legally, but they don't actually have the experience in order to do that. You wouldn't go to a doctor, your ordinary doctor, if you were having a heart attack. You want to go to a specialist. Mm-hmm. So I would say you need to understand, as Vruti said, what are the services that you require. And if you're looking for a turnaround service, go to someone who understands turnaround, who understands how to save a business. And that way I think you will get the best advice you possibly can.
Okay, great. So maybe, Nigel, if I were to ask you if you had a crystal ball and if you were sitting here this time next year, where do you think we would be?
I really can't answer that with any degree of certainty, and I don't think anyone can. I think the only thing which I probably can say with certainty is that COVID is not something which will go away. I think COVID will be here for our grandchildren's children. Right. And maybe their children. Yes, I think they will be able to cope with it better than we have so far, and there will be obviously evolving medication which will undoubtedly help. Notwithstanding that, I think if anyone just believes that in 12 months' time we will be back to where we were in January of 2020, I think they're grossly mistaken.
Okay, well, thanks for that sort of frank and pragmatic opinion, and I guess that will also help businesses not think over-optimistically and really take the realistic steps to make sure that they can survive. So Vruti, coming to Obizz, and you're of course part of our core team, just tell our listeners a bit more as to what attracted you to join this initiative and what you're looking to give and also get out of this initiative.
Sure. I've been involved in community service before, and when this opportunity came in, I think it was really well placed in terms of I started speaking to the people who were involved and the thoughts about really giving information. I think personally for me to be able to share my information to help people, it's joyful, it's what fulfills me. But then also primarily from receiving, and I've had the benefit of receiving information on the medical side, for example, how to deal with potential COVID cases at our workplace and stuff like that. So I think that's what's driven me.
Great. Well, thanks again for your great work and support.
Thank you.
Nigel, any last messages for our listeners today?
I would say stay positive, but that doesn't mean to say bury your head in the sand. I'd say review where you are, take action early, get the proper advice, and then go with a proper business plan, and I'm sure that you will then maximise the opportunity to survive.
Fantastic, great. Yeah, so if you're sick, go get help, go to the doctor, same with your business as well. Early. Yeah. Well, thanks both for making the time.
Thank you.
And I appreciate your support.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.